Welcome in to Daily Faceoff Live, your go-to source for everything hockey. Live every weekday at noon Eastern.
Yo, welcome into Daily Faceoff Live. We're streaming live on YouTube, Twitter, as well as, of course, dailyfaceoff.com. He is our prospect analyst and deputy editor, Stephen Ellis. Mr. Ellis, how you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. How you doing?
It's World Junior season, so I'd expect nothing less of you, and we'll get to that in the next wave coming up. But first, as our prospects guru, perfect time to have you on to talk about Shane Wright scoring his first National Hockey League goal. Let's throw 2 minutes and 30 seconds up on the clock, and let's start with that. A bit poetic in Seattle as facing off against the Montreal Canadiens on Tuesday night for the Seattle Kraken. Shane Wright gets his first NHL goal and does it against Juraj Slafkovsky, the guy that the Canadiens picked ahead of him at number 1 overall back in the June NHL draft. You see the exclamation point from Wright as he celebrates. What a relief that must have been from him, fresh off of his recall from the AHL. And that was really just one of quite a few chances that Wright had in that first period, Stephen.
Wright was fantastic in that game, specifically in the first period. He didn't play a ton overall in the game, but getting that goal was a huge monkey off the back for him. He played fantastic in the AHL, and kind of seeing him in interviews, he looked calm, relaxed. We know he's a good player. To me, he's one of the smartest players we've seen come up through the draft in a few years, and to me, that alone was why I had him as the number 1 prospect. He didn't go out there and blow the OHL by storm last year offensively, but I think he proved that he's one of the smartest prospects in a long time, thinks the game at a high level, kind of like what we see from Crosby, maybe to a lower extent, obviously, but he plays such a smart game. So I was kind of surprised he didn't play as well as we were hoping at the start, but at the same time, Seattle didn't need him to. They were playing really well without him. Going down to the AHL and getting the confidence is exactly what I like to see from young prospects. It's very rare for a player to make a huge impact just months after getting drafted to the NHL. And I think the fact that he went to the AHL looked really good, and he looked ready off the hop. A lot of questions if he'll be at the World Juniors, but I think that, that's the type of confidence boosting game you need. And it was good to see.
Yeah, it seemed like the AHL trip there for the conditioning stint after the Kraken scratched him in 5 consecutive games to send him to the AHL for that 14-day window in which he scored 4 goals in 5 games also really helped him. So we're thinking that the plan is now for the Kraken to send him to Team Canada's World Junior Camp when that opens on Friday. If that is the case, does it make sense, or would you alter that plan at this point, given how well he appeared to play in 1 game, or is it just 1 game?
So he didn't make it on the camp roster. So my guess is they're probably going to hold on to him as long as possible and see what happens, because I think it's more beneficial for him to still be working with the NHL coaches, because he was in the AHL. He's got those players to play with now. Even if he doesn't play every single game, I do think having him involved with the NHL team as long as possible is very important. And then you get a chance to send him to the tournament. But I still think going out there, being in a winning environment, playing top line minutes with some quality teammates would be more beneficial than playing 10, 11 minutes a night in the NHL.
Yeah, that's been the big question in terms of Wright's development path. I think probably we'd all agree that the best place for Shane Wright to be at this exact moment in time is the AHL, but unfortunately that is not possible. Let's talk about Mitch Marner, and it was really the marquee matchup on the slate on Tuesday night as the Toronto Maple Leafs visited the Dallas Stars. The first time in NHL history that 2 players went head-to-head against each other in Jason Robertson and Mitch Marner, both riding point streaks of at least 18 games. And Jason Robertson, no soup for you. You do not get to continue your point streak because your team was shut out by the Toronto Maple Leafs and Matt Murray on Tuesday night. Mitch Marner does continue that point streak along. He has now hit 20 games to increase his franchise record for the Leafs. And when you look at how this game played out, obviously the streaks were the storyline going in, Stephen, but it's the play of Matt Murray after the fact, who is now on a 6-0-2 run since coming back from injury for the Toronto Maple Leafs, who made all 44 saves on shots that he faced.
Well, first off, it's a shame we didn't get to see a Matt Murray versus Matt Murray battle, and there was no chance that was going to happen, but that would have been great. Murray was unbelievable last night, and this is someone where I'm writing about it today for dailyfaceoff.com and how the Leafs went with some questionable goaltending heading into the season, but you had 2 guys that were willing to, and you were hoping to go out there and show why they should be number ones. And they're both playing like number ones right now. But the way Matt Murray looks, this is like the Stanley Cup playoffs that we saw from him years ago in Pittsburgh, every single night. And if
Can
you
he
take away
sustain
that
it?
first, well, he's been, other than that first game against Montreal, he's been lights out. And I think that you can, when he's at the top of his game, he's a very tough goalie to beat. And he looks a lot bigger than I remember seeing him. It feels like his chest protector is like J.S. Shiger level, just like huge. But he's going out there and he's making it really hard for shooters to shoot. And he's moving so much better than he did a year ago when he was in Ottawa. So can he sustain it? I think so. He's doing so with a defense that's very depleted, and they're having to kind of just rotate guys in every couple nights. And he's getting the job done. So right now, I don't see him slowing down anytime soon.
Yeah, it just feels like the Leafs are kind of playing with a house of cards, though. We have questions about whether Murray can sustain this play. Can he stay upright? And then the defense in front of him. When will all those things sort of come back to haunt the Leafs at this point? Because it feels like that's bound to happen. But every time you're kind of looking for it or thinking that it might be the case, it's not. And they end up rolling, which they've continued to do. Let's throw that stat up there one more time, Alex, if we can. Wanted to highlight this because it's pretty incredible. 5.979 goals saved above expected for Matt Murray on Tuesday night. It was the best performance for a goalie in a shutout since modern stats started, according to moneypuck.com. So you see just how impressive, by almost a half a goal or more than a half a goal. That's how impressive Matt Murray was against the Dallas Stars on Tuesday night. Let's talk about the Pittsburgh Penguins, because they've been equally impressive, Stephen, over the last number of weeks. And so much of it has to do with Sidney Crosby, as they are now just 1 point out of second place in the Metropolitan Division standings. Kind of crazy to think about, because the Pens, not all that long ago, you were saying, hey, this team's going to be in a dogfight to make the playoffs with some of the other teams that are in the mix for those wild card spots. Think of teams like the Detroit Red Wings and the Florida Panthers. And, well, it just goes to show you that as Sidney Crosby has been on an absolute tear again, and take a look at this breakdown, the Penguins seem to go exactly as their captain goes. And that's not breaking news in the sense, but it also speaks to how much they seem to be relying on Crosby, especially at a time when someone like Chris Letang is out on the back end. But look at the tear that Crosby's been on over this last number of games. He's got 18 points, and the Pens are 8-1-1 in that stretch. So it's incredible to see 18 points in 10 games, what he's been able to do. You think back to the previous stretch before that, 2-7-2, where the Penguins looked old and tired. There was a couple games where Crosby did not look all that interested. He went in an 11-game stretch there, 5 games without a point. So you just take a look at this, and Sidney Crosby seems to be aging like a fine wine.
There's a reason why he's one of the greatest players of his generation. And this is someone who has missed a lot of time throughout his career. And every time he misses time, you see Evgeny Malkin seemingly stand up, or you find a couple other guys that will show up and keep things moving along. But this is a group that I feel like has had to play kind of against the odds the last couple of years, where it's like, okay, this is a team that's regressing. You kind of expect them to kind of eventually they're going to start missing the playoffs. But Crosby is keeping things alive here. Again, one of the reasons why he's so good. He's one of the smartest players in the league. He's shooting well this year. He's obviously, we know he can still be a good playmaker. That he's still leading this team. He's giving it his all, because the window of where Pittsburgh's going to be competitive is closing in. So he's given it, I think, as hard of an effort as we've seen in his career. And this team, it's hard to bet against them. Whether it's injury after injury the last couple of years, they continue to find a way to shine through, or this year it's just, they go through that struggle and they bounce back. This is a team that's just, it's a mystery sometimes, but then you look at it and say, well, Crosby, Malkin, I guess it kind of makes sense.
Sidney Crosby, the NHL's leader in even strength points. And when you take a look at some of the other guys that are the top 5 scorers in the NHL, including some ties, as our guy Matt Larkin pointed out, I'm going to read you their ages: 25, 27, 23, 29, 24. And oh yeah, there's Sidney Crosby at age 35. So pretty darn impressive for Sidney Crosby and the Penguins. 8-1-1 in their last 10. We kind of paled in comparison, Stephen, to the Bruce Cassidy Bowl in Boston on Monday night, but Paul Maurice returned to Winnipeg for the first time as head coach of the Florida Panthers on Tuesday night. And in this case, certainly gets a standing ovation. And you can see Paul Maurice, an emotional guy, how much he loved his time in Winnipeg. He had mentioned to reporters that he hung on just a little bit too long in that spot. Things got a little bit stale, and the Jets had a tough year last year as a result. Dave Lowry took over. They missed the playoffs, a lot of turmoil and upheaval. Paul Maurice steps into a ready-made situation, you would think, in Florida, even though they underwent some significant offseason surgery. And yet, the Winnipeg Jets, your Central Division leading Winnipeg Jets by points percentage, were steamrolled. They steamrolled the Florida Panthers in this case. My question to you, Stephen, as we've looked at the Jets through the first quarter plus of the season, nearing a third of the season completed, how good are the Jets and what are your expectations?
I was a believer in the Jets. I know for a while I picked them to win the Stanley Cup like 3 or 4 years in a row. And part of it was just because I felt like the way they were building that core was impressive. And then you hear all about all the turmoil and all the players wanting out and all the rumors and things like that. And it's like, can they keep this together? But when you've got a guy like Connor Hellebuck, when he's on his game, he's a top 5 goalie. You have Kyle Connor, Dubois, Wheeler. Like, you got a good group. I've been a huge fan of what Cole Perfetti's been able to do this year. He's injected some new life into this team as we kind of expected. Josh Morrissey, I don't think anyone kind of saw him having the year he's having, where he's been so good offensively, and he's leading the team in scoring, which is nuts. But I think when you just look around the core, they're older now than they were obviously a couple years ago, but I think that type of everything they've gone through has kind of set them up for what we're seeing this year. And I'm still a little worried about their scoring depth when a guy like Sam Gagner sitting 9th in scoring with 7 points in 22 games, and he's been a healthy scratch a few times. But I think that you still, when the high end of this team is still a quality group, and they've been together for a long time. Some of these guys have been here basically since the start of the franchise, since moving from Atlanta. So I think that I was always a believer. It's just, trying to get those results on a consistent basis, and they're starting to do that this year.
Yeah, I think if you're looking for signs of how the Jets could be better, to your point, it's, hey, Kyle Connor has 26 points in 24 games, but really hasn't taken off on the goal scoring front yet, as he ranks third on the team in goals behind both Scheifele and Dubois. And, there's some other signs of life. You see Blake Wheeler, you watch the game, he looks like he's stronger, a little bit faster, which I don't think you'd expect at this point, given, the way last season played out. And it seems like he's also maybe a little bit more free, as we were expecting potentially an awkward situation after being stripped of the Jets captaincy. It just all seems to have worked out for the Jets. Maybe they've had some tough starts. Rick Bowness was saying that he's not a babysitter in terms of how the first periods have played out for the Jets. Things can be better. Maybe they don't need to rely on Connor Hellebuck as much, but man, the Jets look pretty good to this point in the season, and starting to see why there were so many expectations for this team that's mostly the same from last year and didn't find a way to get the job done, didn't have enough juice. Let's talk futures and the World Junior Championship coming up with this week's edition of The Next Wave. All right, Stephen, we've reached that time, my favorite time of the year, when we talk World Juniors and the tournament coming up on Boxing Day in Halifax and Moncton. And that also means that as we dive into this week's edition of The Next Wave, which is delivered by our friends at DoorDash, that we've gotten a sense with some rosters being released for camp of what these Team Canada and USA rosters might look like from an initial standpoint. And so when you take a look at the roster that was released by Team Canada earlier this week, who are some of the surprise omissions?
Well, the one that a lot of people pointed out right off the bat was Matt Savoy, a guy who I put on my projected roster, but also knowing that, he's not a huge player by any means. And if he wasn't going to make the top 9, I feel like there were some guys that would fit the role a bit better deeper in the lineup. But, he's put up some really good numbers this year. I was very impressed with him at the Buffalo Prospect Showcase with the Sabres. And I think he's going to have a good future. He's going to be a huge part of next year's team. And this is a guy that was a top 3 prospect kind of heading into last year, and then it didn't really work out that way. But I think he's going to be a game changer in the NHL level. He's that skilled, but I understand they have a lot of scoring players on this team. They didn't necessarily need them. Denton Matejchuk, a defenseman who's been a fantastic player this year. It's been a lot of fun watching Blue Jackets prospects, and he's one of them where he's been playing as good as he is. Offensively, probably could have played any role they needed him on this blue line, but again, a deep group. And then Jagger Firkus, Seattle Kraken prospect, one of the most electric, one of the most fun players to watch. He's put up a lot of goals this year. His two-way game, I think, has taken a next step forward, and he's a more well-rounded prospect than he was when I was kind of hyping him up as this guy might, when we're redrafting, he might be a top 10 player from the 2022 draft. But again, there's just so much skill in this team. They've got to have some role guys, and that's kind of where these guys kind of fell out of favor.
So you projected your Team Canada roster a few days ago on dailyfaceoff.com. If you haven't seen it already, go and check it out. And one of the guys you left off the list was Reed Schaefer, an Oilers prospect who's had a great year to this point. You still think Schaefer, who was invited to camp, doesn't make it?
My concern there, and the roster you see here is kind of the updated version. He really kind of he had such a hot start. He was playing at a goal per game early on, and then it's kind of just, I believe he's had like 6 goals in the last month. It's not been a total explosion for him as we were kind of hoping to see. But I could see him making it because he does a lot more than just scoring. He can play a physical game. He can get in your face. But there's enough shooters where I think I'd be comfortable leaving him off.
2 things to point out at that Team Canada projected roster, if we could throw that up one more time, Alex. One is you see 3 Chicago Blackhawk prospects on the blue line for Team Canada, which is ultra impressive, led by one of their top picks in Kevin Korchinski. And also Brandt Clarke from the Los Angeles Kings, who's been with the team all season long at the NHL level. I'd expect in the next day or so that the Kings will announce that they are indeed sending Brandt Clarke to Team Canada for World Juniors. And I think the expectation on the back end of that is that Brandt Clarke will come back to the NHL level when it's all said and done. And I think they do plan to burn the first year of his entry-level contract. He's been sitting at 9 games and has been waiting patiently since then. Let's talk about the other side of the border and Team USA, and also with their initial list being out. Steven, who were some of the surprise omissions from that group, and were there bigger surprises than Team Canada?
For sure. USA left off 2 of the top scoring players in the OHL, which you then look at it and say, okay, well, there's the obvious, they like to pick the NCAA and USHL players, but leaving Ty Voigt off when he's been as good as he is, nearly 2 points per game since the hop of the season, that's a guy I don't understand how you leave him off. And then Sasa Pashijov, who, that one's interesting because he was on the summer team. So he was there a few months ago, and he played for the U.S. National Development Program. So he went there. Yeah, he didn't go the NCAA route, but he was a pretty good player in the summer, one of their top scorers. So leaving him off, where he's got 18 goals this year, I think he's 3rd or 4th in OHL goal scoring. Those are 2 really key guys to leave off because they don't have the scoring depth that Canada has. Like, Canada might not bring in Jordan Dumois, who is he's on pace for like 140 points in the QMJHL. So you think about that, they can leave guys off like that because they got the depth. USA doesn't have that same scoring depth. Logan Cooley's a great player, but he's not Connor Bedard. He's not Shane Wright if he's there, things like that. So you think they would want those guys who can put up points, and to leave those 2 guys off, and then you bring in a guy like Tyler Boucher, who's in the OHL too. So like there's that, but he's not putting up a ton of points, and a lot of people are kind of disappointed in his season. I get he's there more to be in a physical role, but yet that seems so odd when you leave off a guy like Ty Voigt of how good he's been.
So what sense can you make of it? Does USA Hockey just not like Sarnia? And what is this just a continuation? And I said that tongue in cheek, but is this just a continuation of what many believe to be a clear bias against American players that have gone a different path in college hockey and playing in the OHL at this point?
From some scouts I've talked to, that's how they view it. They say this is definitely a bias here, where they're looking for the American players, because the players in the States, I should say, because Sasa Pashijov was on the summer team. Like, this was a few months ago, and he was very good. There was no reason from his performance to leave him off in particular. And then Ty Voigt, he's never really been part of the U.S. system. And if they could probably say the argument, he's really small. If they didn't think he was a top 6 player, you want to put some of the college players there instead. I can agree. He probably is not a 4th line caliber player the way USA kind of built this roster. But to leave him off the camp roster altogether, where you still have to make cuts in general, I don't get that one.
Hmm. So now that you've had a chance to take a look at some of the initial invitees to camps, do you have an early favorite for gold for the World Juniors?
I really like the Americans' defense, but I think when it comes to it, you got to look at the team with the best players, and the best. Some of the best players in this tournament are on Canada's front end. So I'm going with Canada. When you look at there, you could have Shane Wright, you could have Dylan Gunther, and then Shane Wright and Brandon Ottman together were one of the best U16 combinations I've ever seen. And Brant Clark was the guy that was setting them up. So those are some guys that you get that chemistry rolling again. I think that's really exciting. I think the biggest question mark for Canada is who their goalie is going to be. Benjamin Goudreau has not been great this year, but neither has Tyler Brennan. But those two guys have been in the Hockey Canada system for a while, so they know what they're getting. And I do think that Goudreau will be the starting goalie. And all he's got to do is just be solid enough. We saw Dylan Garand last year where he was nothing spectacular, but he was good enough where Canada ended up winning gold. And I think just Canada's strength here is the depth, where I didn't have Owen Beck making my initial roster, and this guy's been tearing up the OHL. But I think the fact is they just got so many options where you can throw these guys in different roles, and I think you can be confident. And so right now I'm looking at Canada and saying this is probably one of the deepest Canadian rosters we've seen in a while, and they're my pick to win it all.
Team Canada and net, just be good enough. The theory being maybe, of course, as Canada has struggled to develop goaltenders of late, that Team Canada should have the puck so much that it might not matter. Fascinating stuff to keep an eye on over the next couple of weeks. Puck drops on Boxing Day, December 26th in Halifax and Moncton. That'll do it for this week's edition of The Next Wave, delivered by DoorDash. You see the promo codes there at the bottom of your screen. Game Day 25 gets you 25% off your first order of $15 or more on the DoorDash app. All your favorites and more delivered right to your door by DoorDash. All right, Steven, time for our daily face-off inbox question of the day. Shout out to our boy Jeremiah, who's watching again and in the YouTube chat from way up there in Alaska. Hope you're doing well, Jeremiah. And wanted to ask you, we talked about World Juniors. 'Tis the season. The holidays are coming closer to being upon us. And what's your least favorite part of the holiday season? We're going to go non-hockey today, Steven.
See, my favorite things, World Junior, Spengler Cup, two unbelievable events. My least favorite is the lack of music. I'm not to say
Variety.
quality, but it's a variety. Sure, that's the right word. You can hear the same song if you listen to just like a Christmas radio station. If you listen for 2 hours, you might hear the same song 3 or 4 times, and they'll all be different versions. Could we come up with some more creative new songs? Like I know, like Justin Bieber came out with a Christmas album a couple years ago, at least a couple of Christmas songs, and they weren't great by any means. Let's get some more creativity. My favorite Christmas music is from Trans-Siberian Orchestra. I've seen them live a few times. They're great, and they're doing creative stuff, but they don't release a ton of music. We need to have some better variety here. I can't hear White Christmas 17 times in the same day and all be different versions, but they all sound kind of the same.
My favorite part of the holiday season is the trade freeze that comes into effect, because that means I can kind of maybe put my phone down a little bit during the holiday season. And my least favorite part is the bills that come in January, paying for it all, because Christmas is just a season of overspending, and so it gets pretty expensive. So, yeah, that'll do it for our daily face-off inbox question of the day. Let's get to our daily face-off points bet daily bet segment. Tyler Remchuk, how'd you do last night, Mr. Shot Prop King?
Got the split. Sidney Crosby came through with more than 2.5 shots on goal. The Penguins came through as well, but the Kraken let me down. So it was 2-2 last night. Hopefully I can get on a bit of a heater here, and paying for those January bills won't be quite as bad. So let's jump into it, courtesy of our friends over at Pointsbet Canada, starting with a matchup between the Columbus Blue Jackets and the Buffalo Sabres. I love the over in this spot. It's not paying great, -131. It's set at 6.5. And Columbus has actually been a good under team as of late, but almost every game is ending with 5 or 6 goals. It's not like it's 2 or 3 goal games or anything crazy like that. So they've been getting close. Buffalo, on the other hand, the over has hit, and it's smashed in a lot of them, but it's hit in 8 of their last 10. It's Korpisalo versus Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen between the pipes as well. Korpisalo's allowed 16 goals against in his last 5. I think this is a spot where the over is going to hit pretty easily. Also in this matchup, I like the Rasmus Dahlin shot prop. It's paying -140, one of the best prices we've got on it in a while. Columbus, they give up the second most shots against per 60 in all scenarios. So I like Dahlin on the shot prop. Also in that matchup there at the bottom, Vancouver taking on San Jose. I love the Canucks at this spot. They've won 7 of their last 10. They're starting to piece things together, it looks like. Although there's been a few times this year where maybe we felt that and they've fallen flat on their faces. But I like them to get the win tonight. Paying -120. I think this is a good spot. The Sharks are really struggling right now as well. And the player prop I like in this one is, well, there's a couple. Elias Pettersson, -130 to pick up an assist. He's hit this in 3 of his last 5. I'm going with a full unit on that. And you know what else he's done in 3 of his last 5? Had a multi-point game, and that is paying a very juicy +170 on Pointsbet. So I'm going with a little half unit sprinkle on Pettersson to go over 1.5. And my last one, I just kind of got sold on this. Minnesota +130. They are road dogs against Calgary, but they've won 4 in a row. I'm going to sprinkle on the Wild too, Frank. I'm getting a little aggressive tonight.
Tis the season, a little sprinkling some Christmas magic around it. Love to see it, Tyler Remchuk. Thanks to Tyler for our PointsBet Daily Bet segment. That brings us to my favorite segment, which is garbage time. Stephen Ellis, what's caught your attention? What's caught your eye from around the hockey world?
So I think the first time I did this, I ranted a little bit about the digital board ads and said, I don't like this. I'm very open for things, different things, different change. But in this case, I think I hate it more than I originally did. And there was a good thread on Twitter kind of talking about all the issues with it. So I'm actually blind in one eye. So physically, it is hard to look at the digital boards because I'm using one eye to do it all. So I imagine people who also have similar issues where trying to see what's going on and to see the flickering, see the puck disappear, see the players disappear. I think it looks terrible. And I think the worst ones are the motion ones when you've got kind of like the car flying in or a puck flying in. That's way too distracting. I get it. You kind of want to be visible. You want it to be seen. But when it's flashing, when it's changing, when it's moving, I just feel like they haven't figured it out. And some of the technical issues where, again, players were disappearing, the quality was not great on the boards, that stuff hasn't been fixed yet. I was kind of hoping that would be. So it's still a huge work in progress, but I feel like every game I watch, it's just more of an eyesore, and I'm spending more time paying attention to the boards than I am of who's playing. And I get that's what the advertisers want, but that's very frustrating as a fan.
Yeah, I could see that. First off, I didn't know that you were blind in one eye. So that it certainly changes the perspective on your opinion. So thank you for sharing. I could see how for anyone that maybe struggles with not just eyesight, but also just purely attention based, like a lot of people complain, Stephen, in general, that are casual hockey fans that may watch only a couple games a year, that they are already having a hard enough time tracking the puck. You don't need to layer on any additional distractions to kind of take away from the action. And I thought the thread that was posted on Twitter, which I thought we were going to pull up a tweet or two, if you have a chance to check it out, you should read in depth about how distracting it really is from an eyesight perspective. Because the one thing that we've learned in that thread is that, unfortunately, it's probably not going anywhere, in that this is clearly a package that the NHL has sold to advertisers. It has had plenty of kinks. They haven't worked all of them out yet. In fact, many of them. And I agreed with the assessment from Dan Bagley. If you get a chance to read it, it was like 15 or 20 tweets deep and really well explained, is that, and you see the Washington Capitals player disappearing here, is that they'd much rather see, and I personally fall into this category too, as the NHL has taken the dive into this with jersey ads, is I'd rather see physical ads on players, jerseys, helmets, whatever it is, rather than something distracting like this, which takes away from game viewing experience. So well said by you, Stephen. And yeah, it doesn't unfortunately look like it's going anywhere anytime soon. That'll do it for today's edition of Daily Faceoff Live. Keep it locked on dailyfaceoff.com for all the latest news, insight, and analysis from around the NHL. Thanks to Stephen. Thanks to Tyler Remchuk and our head of production, Alex Lard. We'll be back with you 12 noon Eastern on Thursday. You know where to find us. Until then, have a great day, everyone.
Thanks for tuning in to Daily Faceoff Live. Make sure you hit the subscribe button to never miss an episode.